Welcome to the Uncomfortable Conversation podcast. I am thrilled to be here today with Jamie Forbes, who is not a stranger to the Uncomfortable Conversation, and we are delighted that you are able to join us today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, I was thinking maybe we could start with some of the hats that we both wear that we're bringing to the conversation today, just to help people get to know what the vibe is going to be.
Great.
You want to go first?
Okay, sure. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual assault, so that's certainly in the context of this conversation a hat that I wear. I'm a parent of two now 20-year-olds, mid 20-year-olds, and I am also CEO of Learning Courage, which is an organization, a nonprofit organization that works with independent schools to reduce, respond to, and heal from sexual misconduct.
I love that. So things we have in common, we are parents. My children are a little bit younger. They are 11 and 14, so 6th and 9th grade. So I'm sort of in the thick of it.
Yes, you are.
And also a survivor of child sexual abuse in a family setting. And obviously, this is part of the work this is not my day job, but this is part of the work that I do. And I'm also curious, just sort of thinking about, and then I know one of the things we want to talk about is just the degree to which we bring our survivor identities into our work and sort of what that kind of looks like for us and what that might look like for other people. Maybe we start there.
Great.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about, you do work. So as the CEO of Learning Courage, you work with schools and you help them assess risks and create prevention plans. How relevant or elevated is your identity as a survivor in that work? Like, how do you sort of navigate those two things?
It's very much front and center when we do trainings, when we introduce ourselves. I always introduce myself as a survivor, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is one of the things we hope to do is take shame away from the identity of survivorhood, but also to help schools understand that that's a part of what we bring, is that lived experience of being a survivor. And so I tell my story all the time.
And when you say you tell your story, what does that story look like in the so I think we all as survivors obviously have many stories at many levels of depth. So I'm assuming that when you say I tell my story, it's a version of your story that you have decided that you want to tell in this context.
Sure. And there are several different versions of
Right.
it. So if I'm just introducing myself, it's obviously not so much about the abuse itself. And I never really go into the details of the abuse beyond sort of what happened, how I, internalized that. But as I introduce myself in the setting, introducing myself to schools, it's really about just saying that I was sexually abused by a male teacher when I was a freshman in high school. And it was the experience of going back to that school after receiving a letter from them in the wake of the Spotlight article in 2016 about independent school educator sexual misconduct. And so I responded to that invitation from my school to share my experience. And it was that experience that helped me understand how really well-intentioned people did many things right, but also lacked a lot of the insight, tools, and resources to do this work better. So that's sort of the extent of the
your storytelling
in that context. And in training, I go into more detail. Sometimes, if I'm doing an assembly or working with adults, I go into more detail about really what happened, because I think through the storytelling, there's a lot more that strings that can be played that are really useful.
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of themes in there as well. I mean, I think that there's something that's very powerful to simply name that you are a survivor of sexual violence and I'm from New Jersey, and what school I went to, that is just a fact of my experience,
Right.
and that there's something very powerful about that. I think both what we talked about in terms of reducing shame, and when you think about how common it is, but it's not talked about, there's also just something about bringing it into the room. The other reason that I would do at the very least that level of introduction, as naming it as a part of my identity, is because, and I would do this in sexual harassment prevention and response trainings, is I would name myself as a survivor of child sexual abuse to acknowledge that there are other people in the room who
Absolutely.
may not want to say that about themselves. So just to remind people that, like, people are here who've had really bad things happen to them. And so when we talk about inappropriate jokes in the lunchroom, like, it might mean more to them than it would to you because of the experience that they've had. And so,
Totally.
and then I think the second kind of story that you're talking about, which is kind of like, how do you give testimony to a survivor experience? How did you know that you were ready to do that in a public setting? When I was in college, my freshman year of college, I stood up at a Take Back the Night and told my story in a very emotional way that I was probably not positioned to do, but I was in a place of feeling very kind of compulsive about telling my story because there was so much that I was working on and making sense of, and that wasn't really a safe environment. In my mind, the way I rationalized it was I didn't want to have to keep telling my story. It felt like it was something very important for people to know. I didn't want to have that conversation 100 times. So I figured if I stood up in front of 100 people, then I could just tell the story once.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was, in retrospect, the healthiest. I think, and it was also with a level of just gruesome detail that nobody else really needed to know. And so I didn't have the awareness of just where those boundaries are. And so I'm curious just kind of how you got to a place where you felt safe and comfortable giving your testimony in a way that can be helpful to people, but that wasn't harmful to you.
It's a sort of a foundational aspect of my experience of doing this work because, I mentioned receiving this letter from my school, and, my initial response when I received this letter, which said basically anyone who was sexually abused during their time at the school, we would like to know.
Yeah.
And my initial response literally was, well, good for the school for doing that work. There was no part of me that actually wanted to respond.
Yeah.
In many ways, I thought it didn't even apply to me, partly because I had already told the school my story back when I was a student. So I felt like, well, they already know. So, and then secondarily, like, why would I possibly expose myself to that level of, re-traumatization?
Right.
That just seemed... it seemed like there was certainly nothing for me to gain from that.
Had you been in therapy at that point?
Oh, yeah. Years of therapy.
So you had,
So, and, it was, it was something that I had shared with friends and family. It was not a recovered memory. It was something that I was pretty open about.
Yeah.
But in any case, it was actually a very close friend of mine who I talk a lot about because he's such an amazing advocate and great friend. His name is Doug. He actually called me because he also went to the school, and he said, do you think it's time to tell your story after he received the same letter? And, my response was, F no. And he, was respectful, but also a little challenging. And then I talked to my wife about it, and her response was, okay, interesting, and I respect that. And what kind of message is that sent to our kids, who we have worked really hard to speak out, when they see injustice or experience things. And so that really hit me hard. And what it also helped me do was ultimately feel inspired by the notion of using my story as a way to help others.
Yep. No.
So then I sort of like, okay, now I have to tell my story.
Right.
And then it was also just more a question of like, okay, so what do I tell? And to your point, how do I do that in a way that is appropriate and
Yeah.
not oversharing and is useful as opposed
Yes.
to just like sort of
Right.
vomiting it out?
Well, and I think it's in my case, it's how do I tell my story, recognizing that my story took place inside of a family, and
Right.
that there are some complexities about how you share that story in a way that honors what those people have may or may not have also experienced.
Right.
That it's my story. And
Right.
so, so I think that there was certainly the first disclosure was in my immediate family. There was a secondary disclosure in my extended family. And so it was by the time I got to college, it was a little bit more of I don't want to hold my family's secrets anymore. I think it
Right.
was a big motivator for me. Um, I also had the experience of when you think about disclosing, right? There's the telling your story, and then there's the disclosure experience. Uh, I participated in a really powerful therapy group when I was I think a freshman
Hmm.
that was all about disclosure. So it was 5 or 6 other survivors. It was all of us telling our story in a way that could be received in a healthier, more healing way.
Right.
And that was a private therapeutic experience, which is very different. And
Right.
then later, as I progressed on my own healing journey, I started to also want to share my story to help others.
Yeah.
And that I had the opportunity to participate in the Rape Crisis Center here in Boston organizes a survivor speakers bureau,
Mm.
and they offer training for all of the survivors
Oh,
who
great.
want to do that. And so that has become something that I feel very passionate about, because I think that this is before the Me Too movement. I think the Me Too movement in a lot of ways opened up in a really powerful way the common experiences that survivors have. I think it also created to some extent a little bit of a celebrity culture around
Mm.
being a survivor, and in ways that I sometimes wonder whether it pushed people into sharing that experience in a way where they were still raw and vulnerable, and that it sort of put them in a place that wasn't necessarily healing. And that's something that I think about a lot of just sort of what the impact is on yourself for telling your story. And then also, if you're going to tell your story in an environment like what you're talking about, is do you have the skills and training to manage the room if that brings something up for somebody? I'm curious if that resonates.
Well, it does in many ways because actually, when I first started this work, I was doing it part-time because I felt drawn to it
Mm-hmm.
and I was feeling very self-protective, not knowing how it would feel to constantly tell my story and to be involved in work that, I felt really close to and yet still was healing from.
Right.
And
Do we ever stop healing?
no, I mean, and I have certainly had that. I mean, it just sort of comes up for me every
Yeah.
day.
Right.
And so I waded into that work uh, really slowly
Mm-hmm.
because while I was really emotionally attracted to the work, I was also wondering like what kind of psychic drain will this have on me? And ultimately, it just became clear that there was more meaning and purpose for me in this work than anything else I had done, and that won out.
Right. Well, and for now, and for this chapter of your life and
Right.
this phase of your life, and I think for me, as I spent this work now is not my regular day job. In my regular day job, I feel comfortable talking about I survive being a survivor as part of my identity, but it's not a place where I need to tell my story in any significant way. And
Yeah.
that is what I needed right now, was
Right.
to pull back on feeling so vulnerable and exposed all of the time. And because I think what would come up for me is that when I would do trainings, that every now and then there would be somebody who would be very triggered by the experience or compelled to come forward with their own story that they had never told before. I remember being in a high school audience setting and did just it was a pretty brief overview. And at the end, it was a young person who came and crying, and this was something that they had just had. And again, I, as an adult, had to have the triaging skills. We got the guidance counselor. We sort of got the right people in the room. We got her out of the room into a safe place where we're not sending her home to something that's dangerous. And then it was all going to be handled in the most appropriate way. But for me to be able to, it's hard for me to let go of that experience, and it just impacts. I'm going to cry now, but it's like it impacts me greatly to even think about it.
Yeah. I'm smiling only because it's a very familiar experience to have that sort of vulnerable disclosure, and then people come up to me afterwards and share this, their own experience. And while in many ways that's, I applaud that kind of vulnerability. Obviously there are lots of different aspects. You want to make sure that person gets appropriate care. And
but you don't adopt them and bring them home with
there's
you.
Also the appropriate boundaries that come with that conversation. And, one of the things that survivors of sexual abuse have in common is blurred boundaries. And so, in many ways, we need to model those for people, both to protect ourselves and for others.
Yes. Well, and I think I recognized that was too much for me. And I think, and then there would also occasionally be experiences. I remember another experience in a workplace setting where I shared just a 3-sentence version of my story, and somebody in that training became so triggered and upset by it that with an angry reaction. And so it was sort of turned into a whole, you shouldn't have done that training. The training was terrible. Like, how could you ever say that in a room and know that you're going to cause people to have that kind of reaction? And you made me feel this way. I mean, it was very intense. And so it's just like when you sort of think about, because I think you're right. It's the survivors struggle with boundaries, and we all struggle with boundaries in some way, and have to figure out about how much can I care about somebody in this moment, and then when can I protect myself and compartmentalize and walk away, and how do I do that at the most empathetic way possible, and what skills do I have, and how do I trust? And for me, it's not just about boundaries, it's also about trust.
Totally.
So how can I trust that some other people will help this person, and that it doesn't have to be me, is, I think, part of what I certainly have been working on in that.
That's one of the reasons we start all of our trainings and many of our just conversations with groups is to acknowledge, and this goes back to your earlier point, that in a group this size, statistically speaking, there are others who share this experience. And this can be a triggering conversation for many and difficult. And we want to acknowledge that, and also invite all of you to take care of yourselves in whatever way that means.
Yeah. No, I think
it doesn't eliminate the possibility that someone's going to get angry.
Like I do that too in all of the trainings. It's like, and no matter how much you do that, sometimes like humans are humans, and so they will have their own feelings and reactions, and how to figure out.
And there's an interesting tension between, I think, between giving people that heads up, which I think is appropriate, right? And how we do that is important. And also feeding into this sense of entitled protection, that and sort of identity that many survivors, I think, can entomb themselves in wax around, and it's hard to get out of.
Yes. No, I think that was, I know, something that we had wanted to talk about. It's just this idea of what is a reasonable expectation of the community to manage your personal triggers about being a survivor.
Right.
And and how much, to what extent is being, if being a survivor is the only identity that I have, is that healthy for me? And is that, or is that something that is a phase of being a survivor
Right.
that we should help people live into other parts of their identity as well?
Totally. And my personal experience and also belief is that there's an opportunity for helping people learn resilience through their survivor experience, through the healing that comes. And so that we can actually melt that wax that entombs us around our survivor identity and actually have that just be part of our experience, but not something that, we hang over our shoulder all the time.
Right. I think if we protect people, we're not giving people an opportunity to build tools in their toolbox that will help them navigate the world around them. And so, I think it's also, part of, sometimes I have increasingly been bringing up that I had a female perpetrator, because there's a little bit of a trope around, you must just not feel safe around men.
Right.
And it's like, actually,
that heteronormativity that
right. It's like there's some heteronormativity around it. And then there's also this idea of what could make you feel safe would be to just be with women. I was like, that's not really going to work for me.
Right.
And also just, some of some of the places where more of my trauma came up were in mindful meditative experiences. And so that's also a joke that I have, which is that meditation is triggering for me, but I'm not going to expect people to not meditate anymore.
Right. Right.
Because that's my experience. And so how do we acknowledge that even among survivors, there's lots of different ways that you can have an experience as a survivor. And some people want to use humor in their healing and others don't. And both are fine. And that's a lot of what we do in the Uncomfortable Conversation, is just give different voices to different kinds of survivor experiences.
Totally.
And just normalizing survivor. I think I'm a survivor and I'm an athlete. I'm a survivor and I like music. I'm a survivor. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that.
Well, and there's so much nuance in the human experience too. And I think particularly around for survivors, holding, and for human beings in general, holding two truths, particularly around really challenging topics, can be hard, right? There's in the context of schools, the notion that someone could be a teacher who really had a significant impact on someone and also really caused harm.
Right.
That can be hard for both the person who had that harm, but also for others who, may read the report that from the investigation and say, well, that teacher, couldn't possibly have done that.
Right. Or it's like, or what does it mean about me? There's a shattering of your worldview that happens.
For sure.
And so I think, and a just normal level of denial that comes with that. It's like, I don't want to have my worldview shattered.
Right.
So I want to believe what I believed.
Right.
And I think that's part of the journey that we do together as communities. I'd love to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in schools.
Great.
And to tell me a little bit about what that looks like for you.
So Learning Courage works with independent schools across the country. And the bulk of our work is around prevention. So we do a lot of training, boundary training. That's mostly with adults. We work with boards to make sure that there's alignment and make sure they understand the importance of this work. This is an evergreen issue, right? And we know that if there isn't alignment between board and school leadership, that can be really problematic, particularly when an incident occurs. And then we work with student leadership as well. And so prevention is near and dear to our hearts, because if we can prevent incidents from happening, that's magic. And part of our prevention work is going into schools and doing a full-fledged assessment. So that's usually a multi-day deep dive into the school's inner workings, looking at everything from policies and procedures and practices to what the public safety, organization is, what, really everything that a school does in the context of preventing incidents, how they respond, and to the context, or to the extent that that's relevant, healing as well.
So I loved the list of the assessment areas and how you were thinking about them, and just my insight was that these are probably things that you could think about if you are a parent and you have an extended family, if you are in a college setting or an organizational setting. There's just sort of like there was a
Equally
lot of just
applicable
yeah,
in virtually all
yeah.
contexts.
So let's talk about some of them. So I think the first one you talked about was illusion of community.
Illusion of immunity.
Immunity, not community.
Yeah.
So tell me, so what is an illusion of it?
So
tell me about what that looks like.
Illusion of immunity is basically that would never happen here. That could never happen here because we are, a community of excellence. And that sense really pervades the whole culture of a school. And it means that you're lucky to be here as a teacher, you're lucky to be here as a student, and basically anything. I mean, it can actually sort of mean that people don't feel comfortable identifying anything that's wrong. It can, like, even from a mental health standpoint, like, how could you possibly be unhappy because this is the best place ever?
Right. This is a healthy family. So I would imagine that would look like in a family. It's like not in our family. Like our family is we would never. We're just too loving.
Exactly.
We love each other and care about each other.
There's a healthy amount of that, and then, but in its extreme, it basically prevents people, or discourages them anyway, from questioning, and potentially from raising their hand and saying, A, I'm unhappy, or A, I've been abused, or B, I've been abused. And so that's the illusion of immunity. It's like, that would never happen here. So we don't even talk about that. It just discourages the conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the next one you mentioned was cult of personality.
Yeah. And that's more specific to individuals who oftentimes are incredibly charismatic, and they have oftentimes been around for a long time. They are typically, beloved, oftentimes great teachers, and they often do things differently. And they, over time, can just get away with things that other educators wouldn't be allowed to get away with because of their status as, special, or, really meaningful and impactful. And oftentimes, I mean, it's not universally true, of course. There are plenty of people out there who are charismatic and doing great work. Yeah. So I don't want to say or confuse people to think that charismatic people are not good, but it can therefore be difficult for institutions to be clear-eyed in their assessment of the risks associated with those. And oftentimes, adult perpetrators fall into that category. Right.
Well, and I think you also talked about the role of gaps between policy and procedure. So if you're seeing that there are those charismatic leaders are the ones that are getting through those gaps, that's a problem.
Sure, exactly. So, a school can have the best policies around, and if they're not consistently adhered to, then they might as well not.
Can you give us some examples of what some of those policies are and what a policy gap would look like?
Sure. I mean, there might be a policy around social media or texting with kids.
Right. So being on a one-to-one text chain or a one-to-one social media interaction with a child.
And and
the reason that that's important is because it's an early indicator that somebody is willing to cross a boundary.
Correct.
Before a physical boundary is crossed.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not observable beyond anyone but the individuals who are involved. So, if that, and again, it doesn't always mean it's bad, but it's an opening for boundaries to be pushed and crossed.
Right. So if there's a policy that if a one-on-one interaction happens, that it's my responsibility as the adult to bring a third person into that interaction. And you become aware that that has not happened. That is a sign that it's not a sign that I'm abusing somebody, but it's a sign that I'm not respecting a boundary.
Totally.
And you want to find out that I'm not respecting a boundary before I cross a big boundary.
And it may be that, for example, as a teacher, no one texts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're also a coach and you're texting with your athletes.
Right.
And so, well, that's confusing.
Right.
Wait, I thought that was a school policy, and yet it's not consistently applied.
Right. Yep. Okay. So another one that you talked about was difficulty with hard conversations.
Turns out that it's really important.
Turns out uncomfortable conversations are important.
Have hard conversations. And what we know is that most people are conflict averse.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's just a general statement. And also in schools, there is often a culture of nice. And teachers can often be pleasers. And unless people are given the tools to learn how to have difficult conversations, oftentimes they don't exist.
Right. What are some of those tools?
Well, certainly annual reviews are a really important tool. I think we can all agree that it's important to do that. And yet, there are many schools in particular in the context of my work that actually are inconsistent or non-existent with reviews. And those are important conversations or moments in time where you can say, look, you're really doing well in these areas, and we need to talk about this. This is not going so well. It's an area for you to look at and improve.
Right. And do you feel like people can have a light bulb moment where I'm asking you to have these hard conversations because it is protective to the environment that you are in? I think that's something that, because again, that is how I think about the uncomfortable conversation work, is that if you don't want to live in a world where people are sexually assaulted or abused, then one of the things that you can do is get better at having these kinds of conversations instead of just letting the survivors have to live with all of the repercussions of that and the uncomfortable conversations and dueling troops and shattered worldviews alone. You can actually take some of that on by telling somebody that as much as you appreciate their teaching skills, you have noticed that sometimes they do text with students individually when they're on their team, and maybe you could stop doing that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's why it's one of the key risk areas that we talk about, and we talk about it with everyone in the school so that we create awareness that should be part of a healthy school culture. Set the expectation. That is what schools need. And it protects the adults as well as it protects the students.
Have you seen success stories in that? Can you think of an example of a positive evolution? How does somebody get better at that? What does that look like? How are they going to feel that first time they have that conversation?
I mean, it's a cultural shift, and it has to start from the top. A lot of times, it's actually getting schools to practice what they know they need to do, and I'm trying to think of an exact, example of that, but oftentimes it's really about reminding schools what they say they're going to do and identifying that they're actually may not be doing it in the way that they know they should be. And once they begin, oftentimes it's also like, once we start talking about it, then they're all like, oh, you're right. We're actually, there's something other than this is uncomfortable and I don't like difficult conversations. It's like, oh, that keeps students safe and it keeps me safe. Now I have a reason for like pushing through that.
So it's being able to connect that hard conversation to an outcome that is larger than you.
That's right.
Yeah. Right. Is that you might walk away from that 30-minute conversation feeling some sort of way, but that the way that you're feeling is not an indicator that something is wrong. It's an indicator that you're fixing the thing that is broken. And
totally.
So like the sooner that you can help people understand and make that connection.
Right. Right. And it takes practice. I think we can all agree it's an important life skill, and it requires practice.
It does require practice. And what other observations do you have, or have you had about young people? So you work primarily with adults in school settings, adults and administrators
Right.
and board. But
Mhm.
I'm curious what your observations have been just being around young communities that serve young people and how these issues are showing up for them.
So much. I mean, one of the things that's really clear is that it's the adults who are getting in the way of giving kids the information they need to be in healthy relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And and what I mean by that is adults, whether they're parents or teachers, I mean, first of all, sex is uncomfortable for most people to talk about. And kids are, particularly, secondary school kids are, they want to know about what's going on and what's appropriate and how to keep themselves and their friends safe. And we're not giving them the right information if we're not providing appropriate education and opportunities for conversation around
Right.
that. And most people are uncomfortable with that, adults, and which means that schools therefore have an easy out for not doing that work. And um, and if they don't have an adult who feels comfortable, or a group of adults who feel comfortable initiating that conversation, the kids suffer.
Right. Well, if parents are uncomfortable and teachers are uncomfortable, then students will go to the internet to ask their questions.
Totally.
And we know that those responses are not nuanced or human in a way that is helpful. And so thinking about the repercussions. And do you see the repercussions as different kind of across sex and gender?
Say more about that.
Just the repercussions of silence, right? And so I think it's when I think about what we know about young men and boys right now, where there's higher rates of mental health issues, depression, loneliness. We're seeing more young people not want to be in intimate relationships with each other.
Hmm.
Sort of not finding the ability to have that type of human connection. And then we're upset when, as a result of that, you have kind of a lower empathy group that starts to emerge. And so you don't take time to build those empathy skills or to support each other. So I'm just, I think I've been thinking about that versus, I've been thinking a lot about boys lately.
Yeah, I mean, certainly boys, and much has been written about this, are socialized, at least in the U.S., into believing that, they need to be strong, they need to be powerful, they need to be aggressive in many ways. And that's what being a man is. And those messages can often conflict with what it means to be, a, in intimate relationships and caring. And so that can be really confusing.
Yeah.
And so it's, I think, one of the reasons that boys get into trouble.
Right. Well, I think it's great that people like you, who are male voices, are part of that conversation. When you think about the role that women play in helping boys to develop their emotional vocabulary and sort of the taking on of that, that is something that I think is just generational, but it's, the vast majority of teachers and in schools are women. The vast majority of therapists and other helping professions are women. And so when we show up to talk about our feelings, we're doing that with women. And women don't necessarily know it all about this either. I mean, I think that there's actually a lot of emotional skills related to emotional intelligence that at least I have learned from men, like sometimes put your feelings away and just do the hard thing.
Right.
Or make a joke about it, because like everything doesn't have to be so serious all the time.
Yeah.
Or talking about it at length doesn't necessarily matter. So
I have just a quick story about that I think brings to life the importance of providing open dialogue for these conversations. A while back, we visited a school and met with boys from a dorm, and it was 9 through 12, grades 9 through 12. And we asked a pretty simple question, like, what does consent mean? And of course, every school we go to says we do consent training. And my personal belief is consent training is not the answer. I mean, it's really important that people understand what consent is, but that's just the beginning. And so we asked the question, what does consent mean in the context of your relationships? And it was incredible. Once we got beyond the sort of the discomfort of the conversation and the jokes, people actually started coaching each other about, like, is that consent? What about this? And people were like, no, man, that's not consent. Or, yeah, that's consent. And it was a really rich conversation. And we came back to the school a month later, and the dean of students said to us, I recently polled students about, what have been some of their most memorable moments. And consistently, this group of boys said that was the most powerful thing that I've gotten out of this year.
Yeah. I think that consent training is great if your mental frame is that consent is a language.
Right.
So, like, you would never expect to teach somebody a language in 90 minutes.
Totally.
To be fluent in it. And so if you think about it as a communication skill or as a way to communicate with somebody, and you think about it as a language, I think it sort of is a better frame.
100%. I'm really, in my statement, I was
like
really referring to
a 90-minute training.
Like, everyone knows what the definition of consent is. Full stop. And we're like, okay, so is that all they know?
Is that all they need to know? Is this like if they...
Because if they know
is it the legal definition?
There's so much more beyond that.
Right.
Like, how do you put that into practice?
Right. Yes.
It's really
it's the policy and practice gaps that you were talking about before.
Right.
It's like, I can know what the law is about consent, but it doesn't mean that I can navigate every single situation in my life that would require me to understand whether it was existing right now.
Totally.
And so.
Totally.
Yes. No, I love that. Well, I think we could keep just talking about these issues for a long time, but I am very grateful that you were able.
Fun.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us. And if you picked up on something today, I hope you'll talk about it with somebody in your life or your network. And obviously check out Learning Courage if you are connected to any sort of secondary school that wants to create an environment that is safe for students. And if you liked what you heard today, please like and follow us on Instagram and YouTube. Thanks for joining us.